They're on the border, yeah, one's on the border of the other.
But it's building in and there's no door in and there's
That's right. So the bikes were sent through. That was it. Where do you live, Daniel?
I live on Ingleside. Yeah. We're moving to the North Bay, though. So.
Ah,
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be nice and good.
oh, that'll be a nice one.
Yeah.
You're moving Marin?
Huh?
Marin?
Marin, yeah.
Surprisingly, like housing in Sausalito is like surprises me that it's cheaper than San Francisco.
It
That's
is.
because you can't
Yeah.
get there from here.
You
Yeah.
get like a 2-bedroom with an attached garage for
That's where we're
less
moving.
than what my room and I are paying for rent.
Oops. So I'm going to talk.
You work from home a while.
Yeah. I'm going to talk very briefly about using observation to identify and solve information problems. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to measure those solutions. I'm going to start with a story, but I promise it won't be a long, boring, droll story. So my story is this. Before I got into technical writing, I worked for a long time in healthcare. I worked as a mental health worker and a nursing assistant. And one of the things that I learned very early on was that if you wanted to be good at your job, you had to be an observer. And you had to be an observer beyond just the general facts that you had to collect as a part of your required job. Things like blood pressure and temperature and where the patient was and did they go to the group or whatever. If you wanted to be good, if you wanted to genuinely help people, you had to really be an observer. And that would help you solve problems. The patient, vital signs were fine, meds were on time, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I observed that patient through the day, I noticed that they started to become a little less and less like themselves. In just a general sense of the word, like not with any specific symptoms, right? They weren't diaphoretic, they weren't turning blue, like there was nothing outward that told you that this patient was off, but they were off. I had known the patient for a couple of days, and so I knew that there was something not quite right. And so I continued to follow that patient a little more closely and a little more closely. And I noticed after a little while that they said they felt tingly. And so now there's your first real symptom. Now I had been reporting all of this the whole time to the doctor. And as it turned out, the patient was in the early phases of a very bad reaction to one of the medications that they were on. And this was an acute care facility, so a bad reaction to medicine is a bad thing. But luckily, because myself and the rest of our team were observant, I took that information that I observed, I shared it with my team, we discussed the patient, we defined what the problem was, and then we were able to solve that problem. That patient ended up with a very good result. We withdrew the medication that they were having a reaction to, and they were fine. And so you may be thinking like, okay, but what does this have to do with information development and documentation? Well, we have all kinds of opportunities to observe, or not all of us, but most of us have all kinds of opportunities to really observe our customers and our users and our compatriots and the people who not only use our products, but live within our development communities. And so one of the things that I've done is I've really tried to formalize that observable information gathering techniques that I learned in healthcare and apply them to the information development world in which I live today. And things like when I do a formal usability test, when I gather people together with a very specific test, with a very specific goal, I always try to design in listening time. I want to be able for my customer or my user or my subject to discuss how they're feeling, what they're thinking. Beyond just like we always, when you do a formal usability test, you always say like, think out loud and speak and say what you're doing so that I can record, blah, 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 right? Well, I want to go beyond that. I want to know in a general flow of the conversation how they're feeling. What's their reaction to the software that they're using? What's their feeling about the general thing that they're using? So be formally informal is what I say, right? Like, go to the goal, make sure you're achieving your goal. That user, that person, that customer has dedicated enough time to come in and willingness to do this usability test. Like, meet your goals. Don't ever stray from the fact that you are there to meet a specific goal and meet that goal. But do it in a way that is informal enough to allow that customer to share beyond the contexts of the test that you're performing. And at least that's worked very well for me. Watch for the emotional and personality. That's part of that holistic observation, right? Like, look for the furrowed brow, look for the twin. Listen to hear if somebody's getting anxious as they're going through a task so that you can understand, like, okay, I see this person is making it through this task, but I see in the way that they're interacting and reacting that they're anxious. They're not sure of what they're doing. And you know, on on-site customer visits, what is their environment? Now, these are more rare, generally speaking. But when I've had the opportunity to do on-site visits, there's nothing better than getting an understanding of what is it like where my customer really works. One of the downsides of doing a usability test, it's either a very sterile or a very chaotic environment, depending on how many people you're user testing at the same time, right? And so one of the blessings of going and doing a customer site visit is I get to see, what does their desk look like? What does the vibe feel like in the office? How are these people interacting with each other? And how are they interacting with each other as they're using our software, our product, our widget, whatever, right? And that gives me a better sense of what's it really like to be this person. Now, by this point, you might be thinking, like, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it's in order to define what problem one of the best advices I got early on was, what problem are you trying to solve? So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But hackathons and conferences, what do people talk about? What is the general conversation around the products that you're using, and how are people reacting to that? How are they reacting to not just your products, but if it's a big conference, how are they reacting to your competitors? What are the good things that they say about that? Which is not to say that we should copy those things, but like, what makes them feel good about using that product? And again, you might be thinking, like, what does that have to do with information development? I'm a real believer now that I'm working here at Atlassian. My title, for what titles are worth, is information experience writer, right? Like, it's about creating a holistic experience for that customer. Now, you still must, just like I talked about before, you must be formal. You must meet the tasks which you are there to provide, right? Like, my customer must be able to achieve the problem they're trying to solve using the tools that I write. I write for Bitbucket, so they have to be able to use Git in a way that is not intimidating and that is effective, fast, efficient, allows them to get their code up there, get a pull request done, get review comments, integrate those comments, merge that pull request, deploy that change, and keep moving forward. So lastly is data. Data is something that I wrote a very long kind of droll article about write, measure, repeat, which had a lot of information about, like, these are the functions and forms and how you measure it, but it's great stuff. Like, we did not have this when I came into tech writing. At least I didn't know how to use it. Certainly I didn't have it at IBM. But data, like entry and exit points. Where are people coming into my software? Where are they leaving it? How are they accessing? This can even be used, like at Best Buy, they do this kind of testing. They look, how do people come to a product? How do they interact with that product, and how do they leave that product, right? Did they purchase it? Did they not purchase it? How do people explore? This is all a part of building an empathetic, holistic observation of your customer as you're going through the process. So what does all of this mean? Get the most out of every opportunity that you have to interact and observe your customers, your users, your compatriots. Pay attention. I know that seems like such a bland thing, but like such a bland thing, but pay attention. You have to remind ourselves so often to pay attention, not just to the task at hand, because I don't know if you're like me, but I can get very, very micro-focused on what I'm doing, and I can miss all the things that are around me. So it's important to pay attention. Document what you observe. When I'm at conferences or hackathons or whatever, I don't want to interrupt the flow of a naturally occurring conversation. But as soon as that conversation's over, that's good data that I just got from that customer or that user or that other person that's also in tech writing, right? That's good data. And so I pull out my phone and I send myself an email with notes from that. That way I don't have to interrupt the flow of the natural conversation, but I document what I observe. Because if I don't document what I observe, I lose that data, inevitably, right? Like, I'm not young anymore. I can't remember every conversation and the points that mattered.
You use tape recorders when you do this?
I record all my usability testing with their permission, If I'm at a conference and I think that a panel is going to be very, very intriguing and it's not being recorded, then I'll ask permission. Conversations are a little trickier. I find that's a little off-putting if you pull out a tape recorder. Now, if it's in a more formal setting, like like when I'm providing Git assistance to users at Hackathon, I might actually ask to record that session, but very, very rarely, because it interrupts that natural interaction. In more formal conversations, I think it's fine, so long as you ask permission. Share what you identify and start looking for solutions. This is another really, really important part that we miss so often. Like, I know I get so involved in the solution that I have to provide, the question that I have to answer, and I have a pile of work, and I have 3 other things to do, and I have to change all these things because they updated the feature, and those dumbasses did this, and I've got to do that, right? Like, that it's hard for me to stop and say, I need to share this with the rest of this data that I just got from this hackathon, from looking through the Google Analytics, from talking with customers. I need to share this with my team because I am not the entire team. I need to know from my front-end dev, is there a technical solution that we can apply to this? I need to know from my back-end dev, like, can you support the thing that the front-end guy said he could do? And I need to, not only that, but I need to hear from them, well, that's not really the purpose of this thing. So now I know, okay, that's not the purpose of this thing. The customer doesn't understand what we considered the purpose to be. And that's in a clash, and that's an information problem. That's something I could deal with. That's something I could solve. But I might not know that if I don't share the information and start to look for solutions, but also to identify the problems. During this whole process, the most important thing that I can do, whether I'm interacting with my customers, whether I'm doing usability testing, no matter what I'm doing, the most important thing I can do is listen, listen, listen. The smartest people I know are the best listeners. Absolutely, unequivocally, the smartest people I know are the best listeners.
So what is the solution if your developers and your customers have different ideas about what the product is for?
So in some cases, I'm going to actually talk about that. In some cases, I think the solution is to, first of all, you have to get back to what's the goal? What problem is this tool trying to solve? What problem does the customer think this tool is trying to solve? Do those things meet? And then you might have to get the product manager in and say, like, these things don't meet. And maybe we need another thing, or we need to better describe the thing that we're really trying to do. Sometimes you built a thing that if the customer uses it right, you really believe it will solve the thing that they're trying to do, but they're just misunderstanding it, right? So there, maybe you need a little better guidance. You need that feature cell. You need that idea that, like, I'm actually going to talk about that, but that's a part of the solution. So now I'm going to tell another story. Oh God, no, not another story. So story 2 is observe to identify. So we've talked about that. I went to a hackathon, and I've also done a lot of research when I first started about Git and about Bitbucket, and I wanted to get to know my audience. And so I attended a hackathon, and we were the Git provider for the Salesforce $1 Million Hackathon, and I spent the whole day interacting with people, and I watched very, very smart people not get it with Git, like just not get it. And the basic 3 premises, right? Like add your file, clone your repo, add your file, commit your file, push your file. The basic workflow of Git. People, really smart people, mind you, who weren't like it was missing somewhere. And so, boy, did I learn a lot from that. And just watching people make some mistakes that were like, wow, I don't understand that. And so the other thing I learned, I know there's nobody from GitHub, so like, you're going to have to forget these numbers. These won't be in the slide deck. This is actually internal data. But so we also know from our documentation, both on our Git site and the docs that I write for Bitbucket, we know that this is a monthly rate. We get this many people coming to find out the Git basics. And this isn't even on a product site. This is just on an information site. So we know that like the majority of people who come to us, and we know the majority of people who come to us and then they leave us, so this is exiting the Git site and coming to my docs and the Bitbucket site. And we know that the majority of people who do that come to the 101, they come to the Git basic docs, they come to how do you do this? So like building an understanding of the problem, building an understanding of the problem. And so then I did some usability testing. And I watched people interact and like, how do they use our documentation? And this is always the tricky part, right? Like we have great docs, we have good stuff, but if people don't see it, they leave, right? So we have this horrible drop-off rate that like, what do we do about this, right? And we're almost sure by this point from the hackathon, the usability tests, comments in the docs, comments in support tickets, we know that, and from good data of watching people come in and leave without ever creating, without even ever having created a repository or cloned that repository. Like the very, very basic things of using our product, they bail out right in the beginning. So now we know people just don't know Git. So we've identified the problem. And so now I'm going to talk about solutions. Yay, solutions! And so it's demo time.
A very short story. I once watched a YouTube video, an hour long, of Linus Torvalds trying to explain Git.
Oh, God.
And after an hour, I wouldn't have known any better how to use it than
Right.
than at the beginning.
What a nightmare. Oh, so I feel your, I feel you. So what's the first solution, right? The first solution is a more traditional approach, right? It's documentation. Documentation like we all kind of know documentation. But it's chunked out in a way that makes it less intimidating. We set up Git, like we let them know up front, like each part of this tutorial. So one of the things we know is that like a lot of people came to the tutorial after they had already set up Git, and then we had this in the original tutorial, which was a great tutorial my predecessor wrote. But we know that like a lot of people came and they like went through all this thing and set up Git and all these different and they got frustrated. And so we chunked it out and we broke it up and we said like, here you go. Each thing, if you've done these two things, you can skip right to 3. And we wrote the tutorial, I wrote the tutorial in a way that allowed them to approach it in a less intimidating way. It chunked out the stuff and it allowed them to only do what they felt like they weren't getting, right? Like the part they didn't get, they could get that done, right? And if they hadn't even set up, but they could also start here from absolute scratch. And then the other part we did was we inserted that here in our, so this is when you first come to Bitbucket, and there's another solution that I didn't feel like I had time to show, but so this is the secondary solution. You come here and the very first time you set up a Bitbucket repository, this is what you get, right? We offer you an opportunity to get the GUI client. We tell you like if you're doing command line, and then we give you a link to the Bitbucket 101. What I'm not showing here, excuse me, because I didn't feel like I had time, is in the very, very beginning when you're signing up, we give you a nice pretty link to the Bitbucket 101. Like if you've never used Git, you can go to the Bitbucket 101. And it's just a really easy, encouraging way to say like, hey, if you've never used Git, which most of you haven't, we know this from the data, easy way to get on there. But if you don't, if you're like, oh, I don't want to do a tutorial, gross, you know, or if like, I'm too smart for a tutorial, and we also know we have a large portion of our customer base that's that, you know, like, I'm a programmer, I've been doing this for years, I don't need a tutorial. We provided a nice, easy way. You get through all the 3 stages of Git. You make a directory, you add your project, you get in it that project, which initiates the project. We do your remote add. You can copy and paste actually this whole thing and write in, and you've got your directory, and you've already added it as your remote. And then right here, we allow you to, without ever leaving your command line, we allow you to add a file, do a git add, do a git commit, do a git push. You have gone through all that basic idea of Git. And we know this is the part where people get lost. This is the part where people get frustrated. And so there's demo time. So now we'll talk about measurements. Yes, yes, analytics. Analytics, oh Lord, analytics. So this is my secret sauce. This won't be in the slide deck, sorry. So measure what your solution is. See if it's becoming successful. And so for my Git 101, we know that we get these are monthly numbers. We get 38,595 people come in to the Git 101 at once. We get about half that drop off. That's pretty typical. But maintaining 18,000 users through the first segment is amazing to me. Like, I'm blown away that we managed to retain that kind of user base. And then of those 18,000, we maintain 14,000 through this first segment. And then now this number, everybody keeps telling me this is wrong. And I have looked at the data and it is not wrong. Like, I am maintaining, and it kind of makes sense, right? Like, if you come here and you create a repository, you're gonna wanna at least learn how to clone that repository and add a source file. So we know that we get almost 14,000, almost 15,000 people all the way through those first 3 stages of Git. And now what I didn't show you is that in the 101, we also, there's the setup Git, which is just a real simple guide. We also take you through the concepts so that you get it. You haven't just created a repository, you get why you did that, how it works, what's different about Git, and we show you the UI and we make it nice and simple, but we teach you the concept along with the task so that you're not just documenting features, you're teaching and learning and on all of those things at the same time. So, 1 minute left. So now we'll, now I'm going to take it to the next level. Actually, I think I need to go back to my Prezzo real quick. So, wrap it up. Oh, okay. So I'll wrap it up. I'll come back to this in questions. So, observation. It's more than just tests and the data. Like, it's more than just sit down with a user, do a user test, find out if they could use that feature, and if they could use that feature, then it's a successful test. Well, maybe it's not. Did they hate it? Like, were they frustrated? Were they like, what did you really learn from this? Again, be formally informal, right? Like, achieve your goals in that test. Understand, get the data that you need. But learn more than that, right? Share your findings. Work with a team. Don't try to find either the problem or the solution on your own. Work with a team. And then expand that out, right? Like, I could do a whole nother prezzo on the importance of creating information stories that travel across all the things, but I'm out of time, actually. So solve the problem, measure the solution. Solve the problem, solve the real problem. And that's why I love Write the Docs. Because I can come here and I can observe all of you. And I can hear new solutions. I am so out of touch with API docs. Like a root skill that I need to burnish up and get better at, right? I did it back in the late 90s for IBM, and I haven't really done it until just I came back to here. And so like I'm learning Sphinx, and I'm trying to learn all these other things, and I come to Write the Docs, and I observe, and I listen, and I document what I learn, what I observe. That's because who's awesome? You're awesome. So thank you for having me. Are there any questions?
So
Okay.
what you were describing, where you're trying to get ahead of the person who you're observing, it sounds a little bit like ethnography.
It is a little bit of ethnography. It's also a little bit of psychology. It's mostly, so it's watching for body language, I think, is one of the primary things that we forget to do. And it's also empathy, it's practicing empathy, right? And this is especially important when you do on-site visits. When you're watching the people, if you have the opportunity to do on-site visits, do them. Oh my God, I've learned so much by going on premise in every job that I've had. Absolutely every job I had. Going in, back to the days at IBM, like going into premise, seeing what I knew what our test data center looked like. But let me tell you, man, our test data center was 10,000 times cleaner and more organized and very well appointed. And I went into a real customer data center and I was like, so understanding that relationship and seeing the look of frustration on people's faces, that's that holistic view. So yeah, it's a little bit of ethnography, a little bit of psychology. you know, but it doesn't have to be this big complex thing that you have to go back to school to learn, right? Like it's looking for those human interactions, those human trademarks. My son is autistic, and so I've spent 10 years trying to teach him how to do that. So I have a little bit of that like extra bump in that because it was so important for me to teach Dylan how people react and how that happens. So I had a big up on that, I guess, in some ways. But that's what it really is. Just look for those cues.
I have another quick story. There's an O'Reilly video tutorial on Git, and so I was going through it, and it's kind of a little screwed up somewhere. So it was going through using this GitLab.
Yeah, GitLab.
site, and all of a sudden she starts talking, and she says, "Now you're on Bitbucket." And what's Bitbucket? So I had to go over there in the middle of this lesson and actually sign up and make an account and do all that stuff. And it was easy. It was really easy.
Well, thank
So,
you.